Renewal Church, this is Scott Linke here, part of the preaching team, and I'm going to be bringing you an installment this week from 1 Peter, our 5 minutes in 1 Peter. And this one is from chapter 2, verses 4 to 5. And so let's jump into these two verses. As you come to him, the living stone, rejected by humans, but chosen by God and precious to him, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Now, this is one of the more well-known passages, I think, in the New Testament, at least if you've been a Christian for any time now. And just to say, what may be a cool study to do on your own is to parallel Peter's words with Paul's words from Ephesians chapter 2, verses 19 to 22. But you'll have to do that on your own time so we can stay within the time frame that we have here. And so in verse 4, Peter is laying out and talking about this living stone, which we know is Jesus. And the reason Peter is doing that and reminding him of them, the people that he's writing to, is because he's going to teach them some things and instruct them in some things as living stones. And so he wants to remind them about the living stone, the prototype Jesus. And we read that he was rejected by humans, but chosen by God and precious to him. And so Peter has a people who are feeling that, feeling rejected. They're under trial and tribulation as they're scattered across the land. And so he's reminding them, yes, just as Jesus was rejected, so you will be, but you are precious to God just as Christ is precious to God. And then we get into the meat of verse 5, okay? And we read this word twice in there. It's the word spiritual. We read about a spiritual house being built. We read about spiritual sacrifices being made. And the word spiritual house, this phrase connects to the Old Testament concept of the temple. We don't have time to go into an extensive study, but just to say that this was the beautiful, magnificent building that had been built in which the Jews would walk into this place and they would tangibly know that God was there in their midst and that they were walking into God's presence by what they could see, what they could hear, what they could touch, even what they could taste and smell, that they were being reminded, God is here. And so Peter's using that kind of language that the Jews would know from his scriptures of the Old Testament to teach them about a new house that God is building, a new temple that God is building that is made up of living stones. And so let me say something real quick about the word spiritual here. It doesn't mean non-material, this ethereal, non-material, kind of floaty idea of whatever may come into our minds. But the word spiritual is a very tangible word. Okay, it's a very concrete word. What it means is literally of or by the Spirit. So think of spiritual gifts. We may also say gifts of the Spirit or gifts given by the Spirit. And so for us to be a spiritual house that God is building, it means we're still tangible, that God by his Spirit is taking people like you and me and building this new house and this new temple. Now, I'm not a builder and a construction person. I can imagine the challenge of building with stone, brick, and various other things. But, sometimes I think those stones and bricks may be a little more easy to work with and knock off with hammer and put some stuff in there that would easily set them in place. But when God is building with people, I think sometimes it can be much more difficult because people have sin. And that's what makes it so much more beautiful as God does build this temple that is magnificent. It's a more beautiful temple than one built with stone, with brick. And this is a collective temple that God is building to dwell in by his Spirit. And he goes in and goes on to say that we are a holy priesthood offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus. And so we are offering, again, not immaterial sacrifices, but we're offering tangible sacrifices of or by the Spirit of God. That's the spiritual sacrifices that we're offering. And it's not just traditional ideas of worship, although I think our worship is a sacrifice. We talk about bringing a sacrifice of praise, but the sacrifices we bring include everything in our lives. And especially thinking about the time we live in now, the sacrifices that God would even ask us to bring. And there's a bit of a missional component to this, that we are bringing sacrifices that are of the Spirit in our lives as we tangibly live out the calling of God in our lives. And this temple is being built beautifully, that will be displayed for the world to see if we'll listen and we'll obey and walk it out.